Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. 5 pro-Palestinian activists pleaded not guilty to breaking into Bryce Norton RAF base and damaging 2 Voyager aircraft in protest against Britain's support for Israel. They are accused of spraying red paint on the planes and entering a prohibited site, with their trial scheduled to begin in January 2027. A bipartisan delegation of U.S. lawmakers arrived in Copenhagen to meet the leaders of Denmark and Greenland. This comes amidst pressure from U.S. President Trump, who sees attaining the island as a key part of U.S. national security. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney and Chinese President Xi Jinping are adding to the list of measures to slash tariffs, including a landmark deal for Canadian visitors to enter China visa-free. This is the first meeting between the leaders of 2 nations in 8 years. The UN Security Council holds emergency talks as Iran accuses the US of fueling unrest and Russia warns against foreign interference. While Western powers threaten sanctions, Iranian dissidents warn of mass killings, and the White House says 800 executions are planned. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado presents her Nobel Peace Prize medal to U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. A U.S. official confirms Trump will keep the medal, which he praised as a sign of mutual respect. China says it resolutely opposes a U.S.-Taiwan deal, cutting tariffs and boosting Taiwan's investment in America. Beijing urges Washington to follow the One China policy as it claims Taiwan as its own territory. South Korea's impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol is sentenced to 5 years in prison for abuse of power, obstructing justice, and falsifying documents. The court says his 2024 martial law move caused a national political crisis, and he showed no remorse. Israeli forces kill at least 10 Palestinians and wound several in attacks across Gaza. The violence follows the U.S. announcement of a second phase of the ceasefire deal. Now for this hour, we start with Russia. President Vladimir Putin is mediating in the Iran situation to de-escalate tensions after Putin spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Iranian President Pezeshkian. Moscow, an ally of Iran, has condemned U.S. President Donald Trump's threats of military strikes after Iran cracked down on protests. Russia has been pursuing closer ties with Iran and signed a 20-year strategic partnership pact last year. Putin has expressed Russia's willingness to continue mediation efforts, promoting constructive dialogue with all interested states. In a separate call with Pezeshkian, Putin has voiced support for political and diplomatic solutions to de-escalate the tensions. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes China, Russia, Iran, has blamed Western sanctions for sparking unrest in Iran and called for the removal of external interference. In Turkey, Iranian protesters rallied in Yalova, chanting anti-government slogans in support of protesters in Iran. Let's listen into what a few protesters have shared.
Bir ülkede insanın doğal hakları var. Olur mu 9 gün internet, sabit hat, GSM, bazı şehirlerde elektrik ve su bile kesintili olabilir mi? Bu hangi dinde yazılmış? Hangi kitapta yazılmış? Hangi ahlakta, hangi kurala dayanarak bunlar yazılmış?
İran ülkem için buradayım. Bugün buradayım çünkü benim ailelerimden bir haftadır bir haberim olmadı. Arkadaşlarımdan hiç haberim olmadı. Bir sürü arkadaşlarım sokaklara gittiler. Devlete karşı kalktılar. Bu devleti istemiyorlar. Ama devlet onları öldürüyor. Nasıl öldürüyor? Sanki bir düşman ile savaş yaparak onları öldürüyor. Acımasız bir şekilde onları öldürüyor. Ben buradayım ki onların sesleri olayım.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Keith Vaz, he's a former Britain minister, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, as the protests intensify and crackdowns also intensify, are we seeing this intensifying? But do you think it can end up like Arab Spring without a big change in some countries, of course?
Well, it's possible, Asima, but of course it's still winter in most of the world.
Yes.
So maybe this is a winter revolt. The fact is, this is a occurrence that has happened before. There have been protests in Iran, but never at this kind of level, and never with the support and encouragement of the American president. So what Donald Trump has done is he's managed to get everyone worked up about the possibility of Iran being bombed by the Americans, to the extent where the bombing has subsequently not happened, because Iran has said they're not going to execute a certain individual who they regard as being the leader of the protests, as a result of which America is not intervening, and we're seeing for the first time President Vladimir Putin trying to act as some kind of, I wouldn't say mediator, because it's very clear that he's on the side of Iran, but telephoning Bibi Netanyahu, talking to, no doubt, the president of Turkey, then the Ayatollah in Iran. So this is what's happened. The world has changed. As we speak, the Prime Minister of Canada is in China,
Yes.
speaking to the president there. So, this kind of activity is all happening, and it might result in other people in other countries taking up against their regimes, but so far we've not seen it happen.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And now, bringing Russia into picture, what is Russia exactly trying to do? What is their role between, as it tries to mediate, between Israel and Iran? And we saw that Russian President Putin has held talks with Iranian head Pezeshkian, and also with Israeli, yes, like you said, Bibi.
Well, as I said,
Yes.
it is very clear that Russia is on the side of Iran. They're not trying to build relations now. They've always had very strong relations with Iran. And therefore the situation in Syria, for example, the situation in Yemen, the country where I was born, was in a sense, there was mood music of Russia supporting Iran in what it was doing. Yemen definitely was a proxy war at the time that it happened. So it's interesting that he's reached out to the Israelis. I don't think he said to the Israelis anything other than, we are supporting the Iranian government, so don't do anything that's going to jeopardize your position.
Right.
So it's very, very clear that it's not a case of them saying, don't attack Iran, because Israel would not attack Iran without the cloak that is given to it by the United States of America. And as you've noticed, Mr. Trump's focus has moved from Iran to Greenland. He's much more interested in occupying Greenland at the moment than bombing Iran.
Yes. And how could Russia's Middle East diplomacy, particularly between Israel and Iran, do you think it will make any difference in their geopolitical position when it comes to the ceasefire talks between U.S., Russia, and Ukraine?
It's all in the mix. As you said, countries are on different sides for different occasions. As we speak, President Macron is in Greenland. So he's showing support for Greenland against his NATO ally, the United States of America. Mark Carney, is in Beijing. President Putin is ringing Netanyahu and the leadership in Iran. Everything is upside down in the world of 2025. Nobody knows exactly what is going to happen, but we do know that there are firm allies, and of course the European Union supports Ukraine, but they are against what the Americans are trying to do in Greenland. So there's a bit of changing of sides as we go on in this discussion, and indeed what's going on in the world.
100%. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. So thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for joining us and sharing that insight from London. Now we move on to Venezuela. Venezuela has freed Czech, Hungarian, Dutch, and German citizens who were imprisoned in the country, part of a flow of prisoner releases following the U.S. capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. According to reports, the Czech man who was released had been detained in 2024 when Venezuelan authorities accused him of planning to take part in a plot to kill Maduro, who was still in power as president at the time, and overthrow the government. Czech Foreign Minister Petr Masinka has said that he had been released together with imprisoned nationals from Ireland, Romania, Germany, Albania, Ukraine, and the Netherlands. The Netherlands says that 3 Dutch people had been freed, while Hungary said Hungarian citizens who had been on a search vessel had also been released. Venezuela says that this week more than 400 people have been released, although the rights groups claim that the figure is smaller. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an American attorney and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, now that Venezuela continues to flee, is this part of a broader, what is the motive of Rodriguez freeing these prisoners? Do you think this move will change the trajectory of how legitimate her ruling will be, or Venezuela's reputation or image in the international?
Well, thanks very much for having me and allow me to comment on this. What has happened is that President Trump has really upended some 80 odd years of American policy, even more than that, in regard to how the United States conducts itself in the world. Instead of acting under the principles of the UN Charter of non-aggression, non-interference with other nations, what he has done is revert back to a 19th century view of America first, which means that America is entitled to have an empire, if you will, in the Western Hemisphere, and he concedes perhaps empire status to Russia in Europe, perhaps China in Asia. With the Maduro capture, the Venezuelans are now trying to see how they can best adjust to the new situation which President Trump has created. And that new situation evidently is one of having a puppet regime, if you will, a regime which bows to the will of President Trump. Rather than taking over the country completely, rather than restoring democracy and allowing the country to be independent. He's left in place basically the Maduro regime, even though Maduro is not heading it. So in response to that, Venezuela is trying to do its best to play the new game. And the new game is to let President Trump believe that he is running Venezuela, but the Venezuelans conceding things which are not fundamental to their authoritarian regime. And one of the things that they can do to placate President Trump is to release foreign prisoners. And it also would have the added advantage from the Venezuelan perspective of trying to build support among other nations by these releases. So this is a game which is being played out between President Trump and a new doctrine, not the Monroe Doctrine, but he's called it the Don Doctrine, Donald Trump Doctrine, of being able to control a country through other means other than stationing troops on the ground. So how this is going to play out is difficult to predict, but it does seem that it is not a long-term strategy for waging peace and prosperity either in the Western Hemisphere or in the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for sharing that insight. Now we have a breaking news. According to British Prime Minister's spokesperson, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has no plans to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin directly, despite suggestions from some European leaders that engagement with Moscow may be necessary. The spokesperson has said Starmer remains focused on supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia and on helping Kyiv secure a just and lasting peace. Britain's priority, the spokesperson has added, is to ensure Ukraine is in the strongest possible position both on the battlefield and in any future peace negotiations. Now we move on to our next news. A Moscow court had held a preliminary hearing in a lawsuit filed by Russia's central bank against Belgian financial group Euroclear over the fate of Russia's blocked assets in Europe. Judge Anna Petrukhina ruled that the proceedings would be held behind closed doors at the request of the central bank. The bank alleges that Euroclear acted illegally in freezing the assets and is seeking approximately $232 billion, which includes the assets and compensation for lost returns. Let's listen into what officials has shared.
Но мы просто возмущены тем, что фактически в нашем понимании в процессуальные нарушения нас просто не при процессуальных нарушениях, простите, нас просто не пустили в процесс. Сейчас вообще вот частные инвесторы, они ведут самую разную работу. Кто-то пытается обратиться с лицензиями, кто-то пишет в законодательные там органы, то есть, соответственно, в Госдуму запросы депутатам, кто-то пишет постоянные запросы в Центробанк. Реакции, по сути своей, никакой.
У меня были акции в размере порядка 1 миллиона рублей. Соответственно, сейчас я уже 4-й год хожу по инстанциям, оббиваю пороги и не могу получить свои деньги. Все, что мне предлагают, это продать на вне биржи, организованной площадкой, самостоятельно, с дисконтом 90%.
Really a very important.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an American attorney and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for staying with us. Now looking at this, what more can you tell us about this, and how significant is this, that Russia instead has is asking for the money, and also on top of it they're also asking for compensation of the lost returns?
Well, thanks for allowing me to comment on this. It seems to me that this shows that President Putin has adopted a playbook really from President Trump, in that you try to use the law both ways. First of all, you have to recognize that what Putin and Russia have done in invading Ukraine and causing war there, the worst conflagration since World War II, is completely illegal and completely outside and against international law any way you look at it. At the same time, President Putin is trying to use the law as lawfare, if you will, to benefit himself and Russia. The assets which are in Belgium are frozen at this point, and the question is whether they should be seized or whether there should be a loan granted against those blocked assets. And of course, what Putin is trying to do is to cloak this in law, which of course is ironic in view of the fact that he and Russia are the biggest lawbreakers in the world at this point. So this hearing in Moscow, a court proceeding, is really just like a Stalin show trial. It really doesn't, there's no indication that there's going to be any kind of justice rendered. It's simply a measure to try to use against the West the rule of law in order to be able to solidify its position. The problem, of course, is that to wage peace like you wage war, you've got to have a strategy, you've got to have partners, and you've got to have principles. At this point, the United States, the West, are in disarray. They do not have an overall strategy. There is not a partnership, and the principles are not agreed upon. So in this situation, President Putin is able to try to divide and conquer, particularly focusing on Belgium, which really does not have much in the way of military might, and is totally dependent in many aspects on its center as a financial center. So this is the way in which it's being conducted. It is really sort of a shadow game, and what really needs to happen is for the democracies to formulate a strategy, a partnership, and adhere to the principles in the UN Charter to be able to stop this worst aggression which Putin has unleashed in his invasion of Ukraine. So this, it seems to me, as Shakespeare would say, is full of sound and fury signifying nothing, because the underlying reality is that the nations of the West are not together in regard to a unified response to the aggression of Russia in Ukraine.
Thank you for sharing that deep and excellent insight with us, Mr. Vickery. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. Lithuanian authorities have accused Russia's main intelligence directorate of orchestrating an attempted arson attack in 2024 on a plant supplying radio wave scanners to Ukraine's military. However, 6 individuals from Spain, Colombia, Cuba, Russia, and Belarus have been arrested and face up to 15 years in prison. The attack was coordinated by a group with ties to Russia, which has denied involvement in sabotage activities. Similar attempts were made in Poland, Romania, and Czech Republic. Meanwhile, Lithuania has also issued international warrants for additional suspects. Let's listen in.
Veiklos žynys buvo Šiauliuose įsikūrusios uždarosios akcinės bendrovės TVC Solution infrastruktūra ir bendrovės gaminama produkcija, tai radio bangų spektro analizavimo mobilios stotis, kurios buvo skirtos Ukrainos ginkluotosiam pajėgom. Tai pačios vieno ir tos produkcijos bendra vertė, kuri buvo saugoma teritorijoje, sudarė apie 1,5 milijono, o taikiniai buvo ir kiti susiję objektai. Šioje byloje, kaip minėjau, yra 6 kaltinamieji, tai tikrai pilietybės yra vairios. Paminėsiu, reiškia, kad tai yra Ispanijos pilietis, Ispanijos ir Kolumbijos dvigubas turėtų pilietis, Kolumbijos pilietis, Kubos pilietis, Rusijos pilietis ir Baltarusijos pilietis.
Now we move on to Bulgaria. We have a breaking news coming. Bulgaria will hold a snap election after political parties rejected President Rumen Radev's request to form a government. The Alliance for Rights and Freedoms became the third party this week to decline the mandate, setting the stage for the 8th election in 4 years. Radev has offered the alliance a final chance, leaving the parliament fragmented with no party able to form a stable majority. Prime Minister Rohan Zelyakov's coalition has resigned last month following massive protests against state corruption and tax increases. The political crisis comes just before Bulgaria's entry into the Eurozone. With political stability critical for economic growth and EU funding, Radev will now appoint a caretaker cabinet and set a date for the snap elections. Now we move on to Canada and China. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has hailed a new strategic partnership with China during his first visit to the country in 8 years. In talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Carney has emphasized that both countries could build on their past relationship to adapt to new global realities. The visit comes after years of diplomatic tensions, including retaliatory arrests and trade disputes. As part of the effort to reduce reliance on the United States, Carney has announced a preliminary trade deal with China, including the importation of 49,000 electric vehicles and cooperation on clean energy and fossil fuels. The agreements also opened the door for more Canadian exports, including fossil fuels, to China. Let's listen to what Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has shared.
Canada can thrive in a new system, but to do so, we must be ambitious. We must work at speed and scale to find new partners, to diversify our trade and attract unprecedented levels of investment in our country. And we must be pragmatic. That means we have to understand the differences between Canada and other countries, and then focus our efforts to work together where we're aligned. And it's with this approach that Canada is forging a new strategic partnership with China.
Now we move on to our tech news. European satellite operator Eutelsat said that it has signed a multi-launch agreement with French space startup mediates to deploy future low Earth orbit satellites, marking a strategic push by Europe to reduce reliance on SpaceX. The launches are set to begin in 2027. mediates, a subsidiary of Ariane Group, is developing Europe's first partially reusable mini-launcher aimed at lowering costs and increasing launch frequency. Eutelsat owns OneWeb, currently the only operational LEO constellation's rival to Elon Musk's Starlink, and viewed as a strategic asset by the French and British governments. Europe has intensified efforts to strengthen its space capabilities, with French President Emmanuel Macron calling for faster adoption of LEO constellation. Eutelsat plans to launch 440 new Airbus-built satellites in coming years to expand and renew its network, while mediates expects to start commercial operations in 2026. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.